At exactly 10:42 a.m., my father looked me in the eyes, slid a security badge across the conference table, and smiled. Then he said 7 words I'll never forget. "You're not rocket material anymore, Amelia." The room burst into laughter. Not nervous laughter, comfortable laughter, the kind that comes from people who are absolutely certain they're standing beside the winner. Board members, executives, investors. Even 2 reporters sitting quietly in the back of the room smiled as if they'd just witnessed a harmless family joke. I looked down at the badge. It wasn't mine. It was a temporary visitor pass. My permanent executive access had already been deactivated. Before I even walked into the meeting, my father had planned this. Every second of it. He stood, buttoned his expensive Navy suit, and walked toward the massive window overlooking the production floor of Brooks Aerospace Industries, just outside Houston. Hundreds of engineers moved below us. Robotic arms assembled flight hardware. Technicians inspected propulsion systems. Above them hung a giant banner, "Building America's Future in Space." "Dad?" I said quietly. "You could have told me before the meeting." He didn't even turn around. No. This needed witnesses. Silence spread across the room. Then my younger brother, Ethan Brooks, leaned back in his chair with a grin. "I told you she'd take it personally." A few executives chuckled. Dad finally faced me. "You've spent the last 12 years working for NASA," he shrugged. "You've forgotten how business works." "I never forgot. You left." "I served." His smile disappeared for just a second. Then it returned. "No, Amelia, you chose bureaucracy over family." He picked up a thick blue contract from the table. "Our company just secured the biggest commercial lunar systems partnership in its history." He held it up proudly. $840 million. Applause filled the room. He continued, "And frankly, we need people who build rockets." He looked directly at me, "not people who attend government meetings." More laughter. Someone near the back whispered, "Ouch." I didn't respond. I simply stood, picked up my purse, and reached for the visitor badge. Before leaving, I looked at the contract in my father's hand, only for a second. Most people would have seen signatures, dollar amounts, company logos. I noticed something else, a small silver emblem in the upper right corner. Tiny, almost invisible, 3 letters, FRR. My heartbeat slowed. Very few people outside NASA knew what those letters meant. I did, because for the last 6 years, every mission under my responsibility lived or died by them. I looked back at my father. He smiled confidently. "You have something to say?" I smiled too. "No. Congratulations." Then I walked out. The elevator doors closed. For the first time all morning, I was alone. I let out one slow breath. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. The lock screen showed 17 missed messages, every one of them from coworkers at Johnson Space Center. The newest message had arrived 30 seconds earlier. "Call me. Now." From Laura Chen, Mission Integration Director. I pressed the call button. She answered immediately. "Amelia, I just left." "I know. You okay?" "I've had better mornings." Laura hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Did you see the contract?" "Yes." "Did you notice the mission designation?" "I noticed something." Silence. Then she whispered, "They've entered flight readiness." I stopped walking. People passed me in the lobby. I didn't move. "Already?" "This morning." "Who's leading the review?" Another pause. "You are." I closed my eyes. "Laura, no." Laura sighed. "We tried to reassign it. There wasn't enough time." Outside the glass entrance, my father was standing in front of television cameras, smiling, shaking hands, celebrating. He had no idea that while he was telling the world his company was ready for the moon, NASA had just begun asking one question: is it safe enough to get there? And if the answer was no, the contract he had celebrated in front of everyone would become worthless. An hour later, I walked through the security gates of Johnson Space Center. The atmosphere felt completely different. No applause, no cameras, no champagne, just engineers carrying tablets, flight controllers moving quickly through hallways, monitors filled with telemetry, the quiet intensity that always came before something important. Laura met me outside Mission Operations. She handed me a sealed folder. Across the front, in bold red letters, were 3 words: Flight Readiness Review. Below that, one company name, Brooks Aerospace Industries. I stared at it for several seconds. Laura watched me carefully. "You know the rules." "I do." "You'll have to declare the conflict." "I will." And after that, She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I already knew. If ethics required me to step away, someone else would review the mission. If the engineering met NASA's standards, my father's company would fly. If it didn't, no amount of money, no family name, and no executive title would save it. I reached for the conference room door. Then something made me stop. On the other side of the glass, a senior propulsion engineer was arguing with two mission specialists. One sentence drifted into the hallway. Open quote, "Those vibration test results don't make sense." Close quote. The room fell silent. So did I. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about my family anymore. If those numbers were wrong, someone's life could be at risk. For the next 10 seconds, nobody in mission operations said a word. The propulsion engineer stood frozen beside the screen. A graph filled with vibration data glowed across the wall. Two mission specialists exchanged uneasy looks. Laura quietly stepped inside. "Run it again." The engineer nodded. "I already have." "The numbers are identical." Another silence. One of the specialists finally asked, "Sensor failure?" The engineer shook his head. "I wish." I didn't walk into the room. Not yet. Instead, I stood behind the glass watching. During my 12 years at NASA, I'd learned something most people never understood. Space missions don't usually fail because of one catastrophic mistake. They fail because someone ignores a small one tiny warning, one strange number, one shortcut, and suddenly, people don't come home. Laura opened the conference room door. "You coming in?" I nodded. The moment I entered, everyone stopped talking. Not because I outranked them, because they already knew whose company was on the folder sitting in front of me. I placed it on the table. Before anyone could begin, I spoke. "I have a conflict of interest." The room remained silent. My father owns Brooks Aerospace. My brother is the chief operating officer. I've been publicly removed from the company this morning. No one looked surprised. Laura had already informed them. NASA's ethics officer, David Morales, opened his notebook. "Dr. Brooks, can you remain objective?" "Yes." "Can you prove it?" "I don't have to." Everyone looked at me. "I'll recuse myself." David slowly nodded. "Thank you." Just like that, the folder was slid across the table, away from me. It was no longer my review. It belonged to an independent flight readiness board. Exactly as it should. Across town, my father was still celebrating. Every local business station wanted an interview. Television crews filled the headquarters lobby. Reporters followed him from room to room. One anchor smiled into the camera. "Brooks Aerospace has become one of America's fastest-growing private space companies." Dad laughed. "We're just getting started." A reporter raised her hand. "When will the lunar hardware be delivered to NASA?" Dad smiled confidently. "Right on schedule." Behind the cameras, Ethan quietly leaned toward him. "The production manager wants 5 minutes." "Later." He said it's important. Dad sighed. "Everything's important today." Ethan walked away. The production manager waited beside a sealed crate. His face looked pale. Back at Johnson Space Center, the independent review had already begun. Engineers examined thousands of pages, material certifications, engine performance reports, stress analysis, thermal testing. Every document had one purpose: to answer a single question. Could astronauts trust this hardware with their lives? Nobody cared how much it cost. Nobody cared who built it. Only one thing mattered: the truth. Around 4 that afternoon, Laura walked into my office carrying 2 coffee cups. She placed one beside me. "You've barely spoken." "I'm thinking. About your father?" I looked through the window toward the massive vehicle mock-up facility. "No. The engineers." She frowned. "What about them?" "They're under pressure." Laura nodded. "Always." I slowly turned my chair. When executives promise impossible deadlines, engineers stop asking whether something is ready. They start asking whether it can survive one more test. Laura looked at me for several seconds. "You think that's what happened?" "I don't know, yet." At 6:18 p.m., my phone buzzed. Dad. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered, "Hello." His voice was cheerful. "I've got good news." "I already had plenty today." He laughed. "Still upset?" "I'm not upset." "You should have stayed with the company. You should have let me finish my job." A brief silence. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. "You know, we've skipped plenty of unnecessary reviews over the years. We've always delivered." I stopped breathing for a second. "What did you just say?" "Nothing." You said you've skipped reviews. I meant internal reviews. He laughed awkwardly. Don't overthink it. But I already was. Because in aerospace, there's no such thing as an unnecessary review, not when lives are involved. The next morning, the Independent Flight Readiness Board received the first engineering summary. Laura read the opening paragraph, then immediately looked toward me. Amelia, I stood. What is it? She slowly turned the first page around. Highlighted in yellow was one sentence. Open quote, structural vibration data submitted by Brooks Aerospace does not match raw telemetry collected during qualification testing. Close quote. The room went completely silent. Someone had changed the final report, but the original test data was still sitting on NASA's secure servers. And for the first time, this wasn't just a contract review anymore. It was beginning to look like someone had altered safety records. Nobody spoke. The highlighted sentence stayed on the screen. Open quote, structural vibration data submitted by Brooks Aerospace does not match raw telemetry collected during qualification testing. Close quote. The conference room suddenly felt smaller. Laura looked around the table. Can someone explain this? No one could. One engineer finally cleared his throat. If the raw telemetry is correct. He stopped. Another engineer finished the sentence for him. Then the final certification report isn't. Silence. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind that tells you everyone in the room has just realized the problem is much bigger than they first imagined. David Morales, NASA's ethics officer, slowly closed his notebook. This review has officially changed. Laura looked at him. Meaning, it no longer concerns contract performance. He looked toward the engineering files. It concerns flight safety. Those two words changed everything, because companies can recover from losing contracts. They don't recover from losing the trust of astronauts. Across Houston, my father was enjoying the best week of his career. Brooks Aerospace was everywhere. Business magazines, television interviews, industry podcasts. The company was being called the future of American space manufacturing. Inside headquarters, champagne bottles still sat unopened in executive offices. Employees congratulated one another in the hallways. The lobby television replayed Dad's interview every 30 minutes. Then, his assistant quietly knocked on the office door. Mr. Brooks? Yes? The propulsion division needs your approval. For what? She hesitated. They're requesting another vibration test. Dad barely looked up from his tablet. They already passed. They're saying the latest data doesn't match. He sighed. We're already behind schedule. But sir, they'll use the certified results. The launch window can't move. The assistant nodded slowly, but she didn't look convinced. As she left, one senior engineer standing outside had heard every word, and the expression on his face said exactly what he was thinking. Someone had just chosen the schedule over the science. Back at Johnson Space Center, the Independent Review Board requested every original test file. Not summaries, not spreadsheets, everything. Hours passed. Servers downloaded thousands of gigabytes of engineering data. One by one, specialists compared the company's submitted reports against NASA's archived telemetry. Most of it matched perfectly. Until they reached Test Series 14. A young data analyst frowned. That's strange. Laura walked over. What? The timestamps. What about them? The certification report says this test happened on April 16. She enlarged the raw data. The telemetry says April 18. Another analyst leaned closer. Could someone have uploaded the wrong file? The first analyst slowly shook her head. No, these aren't different files. They're different results. The room became silent again. Late that afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID surprised me. Michael Torres. I smiled. We'd worked together years earlier on the Artemis program, one of the smartest propulsion engineers I'd ever known. I answered, Michael. His voice sounded tense. I shouldn't be calling you. Then why are you? I resigned today. That caught my attention. You resigned this morning. From Brooks Aerospace. I stood up. What happened? Another long silence. Then he quietly said, they stopped listening to engineers. My heart sank. Michael, I can't discuss details. I know, but I needed you to hear one thing. I'm listening. If the review board asks, tell them to look at Test Series 14. Before I could ask another question, the line went dead. The next morning, Laura burst into mission operations carrying a flash drive. You need to see this. I thought I was recused. You are. But this isn't the review. She plugged the drive into a secure workstation. A video appeared. Date stamped. April 18. A vibration test inside Brooks Aerospace's propulsion lab. Everyone watched quietly. The rocket stage began shaking exactly as expected. Then, 23 seconds into the test, a loud metallic crack echoed through the room. The recording stopped. Laura looked at me. The official report says, the test was successful. I stared at the frozen frame. It wasn't. No, it failed. Someone had submitted a successful certification for a test that had clearly ended in failure. The room fell completely silent because everyone understood what that meant. This wasn't a paperwork mistake. This wasn't a data error. If someone knowingly replaced the real results, they hadn't just endangered an $840 million mission. They may have endangered the lives of the astronauts who would eventually trust that hardware. And somewhere across Houston, my father still had no idea that one forgotten video file was about to become the most expensive mistake of his entire career. For nearly a minute, nobody in mission operations spoke. The paused video remained frozen on the screen. The cracked mounting bracket, the failed vibration test, the timestamp. Everything was there. Everything, except one answer. Who changed the report? Laura broke the silence. Can we verify the video's authenticity? A digital forensic specialist nodded. Already did. He rotated his monitor toward the room. The metadata matches NASA's secure archive. No edits. No missing frames. No manipulation. Another engineer slowly whispered, so someone didn't fake the video. They faked the paperwork. At Brooks Aerospace, the atmosphere had changed overnight. The champagne bottles were gone. Executives walked the hallways without speaking. Department managers kept closing their office doors. Nobody wanted to be the first person blamed. At exactly 9:08 a.m., Dad stormed into the executive conference room. Why are NASA engineers requesting our raw telemetry files? No one answered. He looked toward Ethan. You told me every review was complete. It was. So explain this. Ethan slid a printed email across the table. Dad read the first sentence. Open quote. NASA requests immediate access to all original vibration test archives. Close quote. His confident smile disappeared. For the first time, he realized this wasn't a routine review anymore. An hour later, NASA's Independent Flight Readiness Board reconvened. I wasn't part of the vote. I sat quietly in the back of the room as an observer, exactly where ethics required me to be. Laura stood at the podium. Today's objective is simple. We determine whether Brooks Aerospace remains flight ready. One by one, specialists presented their findings. Structures, propulsion, software, materials. Each department reached the same conclusion. The submitted certification package could no longer be trusted. Then the final speaker entered. A gray-haired engineer named Richard Lawson, 41 years at NASA. The room became silent before he even spoke. He placed a single rocket bolt on the table. It looked ordinary, small, unimportant. He held it up. Most people think rockets fail because of explosions. He gently placed the bolt back down. They don't. They fail because somebody ignores something this small. Nobody moved. Richard clicked the projector. The failed vibration video appeared again. Then another image. Then another. Then another. 4 separate qualification tests. Same hardware. Same crack. Same location. Different dates. He turned toward the review board. This wasn't an isolated failure. It was a pattern. Across town, Dad's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered immediately. This is Daniel Brooks. The voice remained calm. Mr. Brooks? This is NASA Flight Readiness Administration. We're notifying you that today's certification review has been suspended pending a formal engineering investigation. Dad stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. What? There must be some mistake. The review board has concerns regarding your submitted qualification data. Our engineers can explain everything. You'll have that opportunity. When? The answer came quietly. Not today. The call ended. Dad stared at the silent phone. Around him, every executive was waiting. Nobody dared ask what happened. Finally, he whispered, they stopped the review. No one said another word. That afternoon, I was leaving Johnson Space Center when someone called my name. Dr. Brooks. I turned around. It was Michael Torres, the propulsion engineer who had resigned. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. I couldn't stay silent anymore, he said. I know. He reached into his backpack, pulled out a sealed envelope. I kept copies. My heartbeat slowed. Copies of what? The engineering review meetings. He looked directly into my eyes. Every time we warned management, they told us to change the reports. I didn't take the envelope. I can't accept that. I know. It's for the investigators, he nodded. I already sent them another copy. I looked at him carefully. Why come here? His answer was almost a whisper. Because your grandfather hired me 20 years ago. He told every engineer the same thing. I smiled sadly. If the numbers aren't honest, the rocket doesn't care how important you are. Michael nodded. He never forgot that. Neither had I. The next morning, NASA's independent review board received Michael's evidence, meeting transcripts, engineering notes, internal emails. One message was highlighted in yellow. It had been sent 6 months earlier, from Ethan Brooks, to 3 senior managers. It read, open quote, use the approved report. We don't have time to repeat the test. The launch window matters more. Close quote. The room went completely silent. No one spoke, because that single email answered the one question everyone had been asking. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone had knowingly chosen schedule over safety. And outside NASA headquarters, television crews had already started arriving, because word was spreading. America's most anticipated private lunar mission might never leave the ground. 3 days later, NASA's final decision was announced. No cameras were allowed inside the review room. No speeches, no celebrations, just facts. Richard Lawson stood and read the board's conclusion. Open quote. The Flight Readiness Board has determined that Brooks Aerospace failed to demonstrate compliance with NASA's flight safety standards. Close quote. He paused, then delivered the sentence, every aerospace company fears. Open quote. Flight certification is denied. Close quote. The room fell silent. The $840 million lunar systems contract was immediately suspended. Within 48 hours, investors pulled out, insurance companies canceled coverage, major partners walked away. The company's stock lost more than half its value before the market closed. It wasn't NASA that destroyed Brooks Aerospace. It was years of ignored warnings, hidden behind polished presentations. A week later, Dad asked to see me. Not at the company, not at his office, at a small diner halfway between Houston and Johnson Space Center. He looked exhausted. The expensive suits were gone. The confidence was gone. For the first time in my life, he looked like a man carrying the weight of every decision he'd ever made. I blamed you, he said quietly. I thought you wanted us to fail. I stirred my coffee. I wasn't even allowed to touch the review. I know that now. He looked out the window. I stopped listening to engineers. I started listening to deadlines. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he whispered, I forgot what we were building. I nodded. You weren't building rockets. You were building trust. 2 months later, Brooks Aerospace filed for bankruptcy protection. Several executives resigned. Ethan accepted responsibility for approving altered certification reports. The federal investigation continued. Many of the company's engineers quickly found jobs at other aerospace firms. Their careers survived because they had tried to tell the truth. 6 months later, NASA announced a new partnership. This time, the contract was awarded to a smaller, veteran-owned engineering company with an outstanding safety record. I was invited to the launch. As the rocket climbed into the Texas sky, everyone around me applauded. I didn't. I simply looked upward, thinking about my grandfather, the man who taught me that rockets don't fly because of ambition. They fly because thousands of people refuse to compromise on a single detail. Later that evening, I opened an old wooden box Grandpa had given me years earlier. Inside was a faded photograph of the two of us standing beside my first student rocket. Behind it, I found a folded note in his handwriting. Open quote, quote, Amelia, the easiest way to reach the stars is to lie about the numbers. The only way to deserve the stars is to tell the truth, even when it costs you everything. Close quote. I smiled through tears because my father lost a company, but Grandpa's legacy finally reached the moon.